good evening from this part of the world to all the participants of this panel session here at the C20 Virtual Summit. And good morning to other parts of the world, wherever you are. This is a nice Friday weekend, and we welcome you to this panel session at the C20. The title of the panel session is The Future of Development, a Digital Perspective. And I bet that you consider this as one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting panel in the long lineup of panel sessions, in the exciting panel sessions in the C20. I welcome you to this session. I am Neth Danyo, Elenita Danyo, from the Action Group on Erosion, Technology and Concentration, ETC Group, a small international NGO with offices in Southern Philippines, in Canada, in Mexico City, and in the UK. We monitor new and emerging technologies and how they impact marginalized communities. I am very honored to be the session moderator for today in this STEAM panel on the future of development. As the dawn breaks in the fourth industrial revolution, questions around the benefits of digitalization to the betterment of humanity have filtered in discourses on every level. Even more so now, as the international community has committed to a mission not to leave anyone behind in the UN's 2030 development agenda. In a world where 7 out of the 10 biggest companies in terms of market capitalization are technology companies, and 4 out of the 10 richest people, who are almost all men and white, on Earth derive their wealth from developing and selling digital technologies and platforms, the realization of a paradigm shift in the digital economy has emerged as a dire imperative. In a reality where women's access to the internet and mobile phones is about 85% of the level of men average, in a total of 1.7 billion people, women, in low and middle income countries are not connected at all, that paradigm shift becomes a moral imperative. Solutions that facilitate transition from a paradigm centered around corporate profit to one centered around social empowerment and creative expression must be an utmost priority. In the digital world and its convergence with the biological world, or biodigital convergence, as we know it, data, both personal and collective, is often referred to as the new oil or new soil, in the case of food systems. And the harvesting of data, considered as profitable, often without the knowledge and consent of the people where data have been harvested from. The future of development should take form around developing and promoting technology that is genuinely human-centered, ethical and trustworthy, safeguards the rights of people, and treats the development of human capacities and full potentials as central. Significantly, as learning has moved online and young people have occupied digital spaces, especially in this time of the pandemic, it has demonstrated the need for an urgent prioritization of online safety. This panel addresses these multiple avenues in a transition towards a human-centered digital era, or to put on an alternative lens in shaping the future of development and defining the role of digital technologies in it. This session aims to deconstruct the benefits and pitfalls of emerging technologies in the digital age more generally towards the advancement of just and genuine development. In the backdrop of a pandemic, which is deeply a development crisis, that amplified distance and promoted technology as a means for interaction, G20 states must act quickly and decisively to address an increasingly widening digital gap, along with its underlying income and gender divide, despite the years of efforts to close the gap. In light of this, civil society calls on states to promote the civic use of technology by their citizens and by their workforces, and on the international community to collaboratively enhance cyber safety, coordinate global investment in digital skills, develop global standards, establish global framework for privacy, and involve multi-stakeholders in the production of ethical technology. The C20 calls on digital development to be deliberated and evaluated by society in a more anticipatory, participatory, and transparent process that puts common good above profits and benefits for a few. With that introduction, I'd like to introduce to you the esteemed panel of speakers in this exciting session. We'll have His Excellency Dr. Munir Eldisauki, who is the co-chair of the G20 Digital Economy Task Force. Dr. Munir is also the assistant minister, of the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We also have His Excellency Omar Sultan Al-Ulama, who is the head of the Ministry of State for AI, Artificial Intelligence of the United Arab Emirates. Minister Al-Ulama is UAE's first Minister of AI, the youngest, and I think the first Minister of AI in the world. This is in line with UAE's vision to be at the forefront of the global technological revolution. We also have Dr. Patricia Michel, who is the co-founder and policy lead of Health Enabled, which is an Africa-based not-for-profit organization that helps governments integrate proven life-saving digital health interventions into their health system. Our fourth esteemed panelist is Dr. Andrew Wyckoff, who is the director of the Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation of the OECD. And our last but not the least panelist is Dr. Yoon Park, who is the founder and chief executive officer of the DQ Institute, and also the chair of the C20 Digital Economy Working Group. The DQ Institute is an international think tank that is dedicated to setting global standards for digital intelligence, education, outreach, and policy. I welcome all our esteemed speakers, and we'll give them 5 minutes each for their opening statements in this round of our discussion. So I give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Munir Eldisauki from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who is the co-chair of the G20 Digital Economy Task Force. Dr. Munir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Neth. Good afternoon, Excellencies, guests, colleagues, friends, and participants. It is a great honor and a pleasure for me to be a part of this distinguished panel today. And I would like to start by thanking the C20 Secretariat for organizing this panel on the future of development from the digital perspective, which is indeed a very timely topic for discussion. I look forward to seeing a very interesting and exciting panel, as you mentioned, Neth, probably one of the most exciting today, with my distinguished colleagues and panelists. Thank you very much, Neth. Back to you.
Dr. Munir, would you like to have your opening statement at this point? Or you would rather that I ask you your round of questions later?
I'd save it for the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. I give the floor now and welcome Dr. Omar Sultan Al-Ulama from the UAE for his opening remarks in this round.
Thank you very much, Neth. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure and honor being with all of you here today. And I would like to start by thanking and congratulating the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the monumental efforts taken by the Kingdom to ensure that the G20 is inclusive of all countries, and that it has within it the priorities and ambitions to create a better future for all. The United Arab Emirates is committed fully to any initiative that increases global dialogues and is a keen supporter of the Kingdom's efforts within the G20 and beyond. I'd also like to express my solidarity for those suffering from the health, social, and economic impacts of COVID-19, and to the families who have unfortunately lost a loved one because of this global pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently at an inflection point. We have seen what 2025 looks like with our feet planted in we've seen what 2025 looks like with our feet planted in 2020. We have gone through so far an economic, social, and political catastrophe that is unlike anything that we have seen throughout history. Economically, the dust of the pandemic has not yet settled, but it has cost us more than any world war. Socially, COVID-19 is nearing 1 million global deaths, and has led more than half of the global population being under some sort of lockdown this year, which would have seemed unthinkable even last year. And politically, the pandemic has shown us that multilateralism is not invincible, nor is it something that we can take for granted. And now we're presented with the question, do we like the future that we're moving towards, or do we want to modify it? The COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the fore the inherent cracks that are in our system, making apparent the increasing inequalities that our past actions have produced. These actions are neither sustainable nor are they resilient. It has also presented us with a silver lining, obliging us to future-proof all of our next steps that need to become both agile and sustainable. I'd like to express again my thanks and my appreciation for being part of this panel, and hope that understanding this context, we'll be able to create a better future by taking the right actions post this session, and that we'll be able to put a roadmap that ensures that our future is better for everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'd like to welcome our friend Patricia from Health Enabled for her opening statement at this point.
Great, thank you.
And good morning. Good early morning to you.
And thank you, Neth, and thank you to Your Excellencies for your remarks this morning, and for this invitation to speak on this panel. I think one of the things, digital transformation and the digitization of everything is happening in real time, and the demands posed by COVID-19 have significantly accelerated this process. From the early days of digital development, the two major sectors that everyone believed would benefit the most from digital technology were health and education. And at no other time have we seen these two areas pushed to their limits than by the current pandemic. In health, we've seen great investments in national health information systems, electronic medical records, and mobile health applications for everything from health promotion to prevention of disease. And alongside these investments, we've also seen countries putting into place national policies and strategies to guide them. A few years ago, Health Enabled started an initiative with the Global Development Incubator called the Global Digital Health Index to help countries measure and monitor their maturity in digital health. And what we learned from that process is that while many countries were very strong in their leadership and governance, they did not necessarily have the privacy and security policies in place to keep pace with the innovations and the technologies that were now coming on board. And what this has meant for things like COVID-19 is that the countries that had made some of these investments and that were more mature were able to apply these innovations and technologies in a very quick way to addressing COVID-19 very strategically. And a good example of this is Ghana, where they had a fully nationally scaled national health information system, and they were able to adapt it and adopt it for addressing the COVID pandemic quite quickly. In education, much of the investment in digital development has been in putting computers in schools and increasing internet access, et cetera. But what we don't have in the education sector in many low and middle income countries is a good education management information system to know who the children are, where they are, what the schools are doing, and how best to support those children. In March, UNESCO estimated that there were 290 million children that were out of school. And this was sort of in the early lockdown of the pandemic. In September, UNICEF estimates that 24 million children will drop out of school. And what we've learned is that once children drop out of school, it's very difficult to get them back into the education system. And we're also seeing many of the issues with the digital divide in terms of access to bandwidth, et cetera. In Washington, D.C., which is where I live, one of the challenges that we've seen is that more than 40% of children have never logged into remote learning, even though it's being made accessible for all children. And they've done a very active job of distributing devices. So there is a real concern here around the, as Neth mentioned earlier, around the gender divide, around the divide in terms of access to technology, as well as bandwidth, that has the potential to increase inequities. And I think that is the theme of this year's G20 is a real focus on equity. And to address some of these issues, there are a number of tools that have been developed that I would encourage technology companies and organizations that are thinking about working in this area to take up and consider using, including things like the Principles for Digital Development, as well as applying a gender analysis lens to any of the work that is being done to ensure inclusivity, as well as reduced bias. And UNICEF recently did develop an AI guide for engagement with children that I think is just a useful resource for engagement with any human being. But in addition to really addressing the needs of children, particularly when looking at things like health and education.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think that those are really very good information and facts that actually lay the ground for our discussions later, particularly on the issues and concerns around digital technologies in education and health. So looking forward to further interrogating those views later in the next round. So I'd like to welcome Andy Wyckoff from the OECD for his opening statement at this round, to warm us up on the discussion.
Thank you, Neth, and good day, everyone, and Your Excellencies, the audience, and my fellow panel members. It's a real pleasure to contribute to the C20 here. The OECD, which I hope is known to many, is a multilateral organization based in Paris. We have 37 members, but one of the ways we expand our influence and reach is we are honored to support the G20 process. In this respect, we were privileged to help out with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia during their presidency, something we very much valued and appreciated. We draw on our work that has almost been going on for 40 years on the digital transformation, which has been underway for some time, but I agree has really hit an inflection point, has turned the corner around 2005, 2007 by my estimates. And in fact, in 2017, we undertook as one of the central priorities of the OECD a broad-based project that involved 14 different policy committees, everything from tax to trade to transportation, to look at how the digital transformation was affecting policies in their area and whether they were fit for purpose in this new digital era. And if not, what had to be done to make sure that they were serving the goals that we wanted in this new environment. This led to a couple different findings that we recommended to governments. One is that given the fast pace of change, it's very hard to make specific rules and regulations in this environment. Rather, what we were recommending were more broad-based principles, such as what Patty just referred to at NSF, that kind of provide lines on the road you're supposed to stay between, but not dictating exactly the size or the color of the car going down the road, but some general principles that we all abide to. And these are what we call human-centric AI principles. They were agreed to by OECD member countries at a ministerial level last May. And then, thankfully, they went on to inform what are now the G20 AI principles in June of last year. And under the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's presidency, we began to look at issues of implementation and how do we go from principles to operationalization of these principles and reality. And some of the things we've done at the OECD to help with that endeavor are we've created this rather large AI observatory that acts as a repository for a lot of information, data, and more than 300 different policies that 60 different countries have put forward to look at AI. We created an expert group of over 100 people because it's hard to keep up with and you have to stay at the cutting edge. And most recently, last June, under the Canadian and French leadership, a new global partnership on AI has been put forward. There are 15 founding members and many more come on. And theirs isn't a normative group, but is again trying to look at operationalizing it. What are some of the technical work that we need to do to make these aspirations come true? Let me just end because I look forward to the debate. I want to provoke a little bit, and with all due preference and honor to our esteemed presidency and the Minister of AI, I want to say that data is not oil. In fact, the analogy is good because it's certainly valuable, but I want to point out that data can be reused over and over again. It's non-rivalrous. Economists say this gives it much different properties than oil. And I want to say it's very heterogeneous. When we look at the COVID issue, which I hope we do, data is playing an important role. And it's personal data. There's few things far more personal than health data, but it's also about ICU beds. It's about ventilators. It's about supply chains. And so we need to, I think, expand our notion and make the problem smaller a little bit by putting data into different categories, just as we talk about food in different categories. And with that, I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, for the provocative introduction and also very informative. I think just mentioning AI provokes discussion, even that mention. And I think that assertion that data is not oil, like some people will say, okay, data is like soil then. Like it's reusable, it's heterogeneous, it has this entire network of communities and microcosmic communities inside. So I think that we will have a very provocative and I'm sure exciting discussion on that later. So I'd like to give the floor to a colleague in the C20 task force on digital economy, Dr. Yuyun Park from South Korea, who's based in Singapore. So Yuyun, you have the floor for the introductory statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this discussion. Your Highness, as well as the fellow speakers and the audience. I know this is a difficult time, and I wish that today's discussion is really something tangible. I really like the Andy's vast provocations. I have a lot of things to say about this, but let me introduce what we do in a DQ Institute. So DQ Institute is a think tank to develop global standard for digital literacy, skills, and readiness. Good news is that we started out this journey 10 years ago, and we developed a global coalition together with the OECD, World Economic Forum, and others to promote the digital skills around the world 2 years ago. And good news is that September 24th this year, finally we have standardization process is over. And IEEE Standard Association developed the world first global standard for digital literacy and digital skills. So that is a skills that is needed in the AI age and when it comes to the digital technologies and others. So what does it mean? Many people think that, okay, standard means something that can be mandated to the nations or compliance or others. But to me, standard is needed because we want to set the minimum bar that no children, no workforce, no individuals will left behind when it comes to empowerment in the age of AI. So what we have currently is through the DQ framework, we have a globally accepted set of definition and concept, common language when it comes to digital literacy and digital skills. G20, one of the key agenda was how we can empower workforce, women, children with digital skills. And with DQ, we can support nations to bring the reference frameworks and benchmark frameworks for nations to develop the curriculum and workforce training and human capital development when it comes to age of AI. We also can support the industry and certifications and others so that we can ensure everybody in the AI age will not be left behind. And I want to a little bit go deeper on the children issue because this is really dear to my heart. And before COVID, we published the Child Online Safety Index, which was the February this year. And we found that 60%, 60, of 8 to 12 years old have experienced at least one cyber risk. That includes cyberbullying, gaming disorders, risky content, context, and others, fake news, and others. So if you think about this number, before COVID, we called this cyber pandemic. What does it mean? Is that we really need to focus on how to empower individuals in this age. Because, of course, there's our dangers and risks out there. But more importantly, there's such a lack of empowerment to overcome these difficulties. So we developed this concept of EQ as a new intelligence in the fourth industrial revolution and more, beyond IQ and EQ. So when we talk about digital skills, a lot of people think, okay, this is a technical skills, how to use AI and others. But no, what we think digital intelligence should be is about the comprehensive set of skills that include cognitive skills, metacognitive skills, social emotional skills, and others, and technical skills to thrive in the age of AI. So we need to cover all dimensions of digital life, starting with identity, use, safety, security, emotional intelligence, communication, literacy, and rights, and rooted with human value. We believe this is a very, very important because the most important question in the AI age is what it means to be human. What is most human thing that we believe the moral and ethical value is the true intelligence in the age of AI. So along that line, we developed this framework of 8 dimensions of digital life at the same time across the 3 different maturity levels. The first is a must-have life skill, which we call digital citizenship skill. And second part, so we know how to live online. And second, we know how to be creative online. So we create technology, content, and all others. So that is digital creativity. And third part is that we need to empower people to translate their creativity into innovations, making into the value, entrepreneurship, and growth and impact. So this is the higher level of 3x8, very simple framework of digital intelligence. And we have a very granular set of definition, knowledge, and skills that can be implemented by nations. So along that line, I want to just keep emphasizing about the must-have digital life skill because a lot of nations are focusing on the coding, robotics, and all others, which are very, very important. But often we neglect the must-have life skill, and which is a fundamental to make everybody into an independent thinker who can minimize the risk and overcome the difficulties and agile and thrive in the AI age. So this part is, we believe, the most important element that has to be implemented across the border. So we've been working with the World Economic Forum last 3 years to develop this empower 8 to 12 years old. We actually started out this age group as a new generation to make it into digital leader. So we developed this initiative for 3 years, And now with the global standard, we are working with the Saudi Arabia and MCIT to make it into the next version of the changing the nations into the digital citizen and digital nations. And lastly, importantly, I want to end my introductory remark with how we should work together with the G20. We are coming from the civic sector side. We are coming from thinking side and academic. We know how to measure. We know how to develop the framework. But unless it can be embedded in the policy making, it is a very difficult battle because digital transformation, private sector and public sector run like fast track bullet train. And it is important that the policy has to embed it, the human-centered technology and empowerment in the core. So we had a discussion so far with the G20. When you measure the success of digital economy, we want to ensure individual well-being, especially starting with the children. And their empowerment has to be embedded in this when we measure the success of digital economy. So I want to end with this, but I really look forward to our further discussion. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Yuyun, for really raising the challenge, echoing what you said earlier, that we may have standards, we may have principles. I would like to go to the next round of our conversation in this session. Like we've heard the esteemed panelists providing their opening statements, like introducing key issues and also letting us know about their work. And in this next session, we will actually have a roundtable discussion. Like we'll try to be to make it free flowing, but I will actually introduce some questions to provoke the discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we are actually going into the round of conversation where I actually will throw some provocative questions to our esteemed speakers. I would really encourage the participants whom we don't see here to type in your questions as we go along. The technical team will track those questions and we will entertain some of those questions in the next round after this round of discussion. So as I mentioned earlier, if you heard me or if I were to, I had 2 week connection, I will throw some provocative questions to each of our panelists to start off the discussion. I'd like to ask a question to His Excellency Dr. Munir El-Suki from Saudi Arabia, particularly in his capacity as the co-chair of the G20 Digital Economy Task Force. Can you tell us the milestones and prospects of G20 efforts in bridging the digital divide and ensuring inclusive investments in digital connectivity? I think the concept of digital divide came up very, very clearly in my introduction and also in Patricia's initial intervention. So we would really welcome some sharing coming from you as the co-chair of the Digital Economy Task Force of the G20. Like, what are these milestones and prospects? And also, what are your thoughts in terms of realizing the potential of human-centered AI to address inequalities in wealth, opportunities, and gender, which Andrew actually raised earlier, the idea of human-centered AI, which by is thought-provoking, will actually spark debate. So I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Munir to answer this question.
Thank you very much, Neth. Although I have a feeling that you have issues with your connectivity, just to spur up the discussion on the digital gap. So in the G20 Saudi presidency this year, in addition to the 5 areas of work that the Digital Economy Task Force was focusing on, we introduced digital connectivity. Of course, this is an ongoing issue, but we really made it an emphasis this year. And in light of the pandemic that we've been through, everyone recognized its importance even further. Digital connectivity is obviously a prerequisite for all digital applications. And as mentioned by Dr. Park and others in the introduction, establishing learning platforms is, of course, a very important issue today, especially in the pandemic that we're facing. But the underlying potential payoff of connectivity and connecting humanity is even bigger. And the challenges that we see fundamentally, that we emphasized in our ministerial declaration under the Saudi presidency, are not only related to basic infrastructure issues. We know that enhancing infrastructure, depending on where you are in the world, can give you an enhancement in GDP of around 1.2 to 2.5% potentially of growth. But there's more to it than just basic infrastructure and connectivity from a hardware perspective. We have a few other elements, namely four. One of them, as even mentioned in the introduction by the esteemed panelist, is the basic digital skills. We're not talking about advanced programming access or capabilities, just the basic digital skills. About 1/3 of the global population today is lacking these basic digital skills. And that becomes a main challenge for access to internet. Another issue is that there's still a major affordability gap. And even in the G20 countries, basic internet and connectivity is still considered expensive. The third issue is that there's a relevance gap. And by that, I mean the online content isn't relevant to all different nations, countries, and especially in the rural areas. If we look at the online content in terms of spoken languages, it represents only 5% of the languages in the world today, which is something that needs to be significantly improved. And finally, there's a basic awareness gap. Now, some people basically just don't know what the internet can do for them. What are the advantages of connectivity? Some of them don't even know that you can access internet from your mobile phone. These all pose challenges to connectivity and connecting humanity. And basically, we need to work collaboratively on overcoming all of these 5 challenges. And in the digital economy task force, during the ministerial declaration, ministers recognized the need to close these gaps and the importance of working with stakeholders to connect humanity by accelerating global internet penetration. Thank you, Nath.
Thank you, Dr. Moniz. It was very informative. I will go back to you later on that question on how do you realize the potentials of human-centered AI. But first, I will pose a question to His Excellency Omar Sultan Al Ulama from the UAE. Like, as the Minister of State for AI, like, how do you envision AI and other digital technologies to deliver basic obligations of state with regards to ensuring addressing poverty, hunger, and inequality among their population? I think this will sort of like provide some inspiration to other governments who are thinking of like pole vaulting into AI and other digital technologies. It would be good to like have to share your views on this. And also, as the Minister of AI of the UAE, what are the drivers for research and development in social responsible and inclusive AI?
Thank you very much, Nath.
To answer those questions.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank His Excellency Munir for his answer. It was really informative and shows us that the whole world is actually coming together on this issue. I'd like to touch upon something that Andy said before proceeding to answer your question, which is data is not the new oil. And I think I've gone on the record saying that in the World Economic Forum Dead Sea event. But I also believe that data is not the new oil just because it's not a finite resource. At the end of the day, data as well is useless if you don't know how to use it. And at the same time, having an excess of data isn't necessarily a good thing. Having an excess of oil is great because filtering the data and using it in an optimal manner is going to be quite costly if you don't know how to filter it and actually use fast data instead of big data. So thank you, Andy, for bringing that up, and I completely agree with it. Now, with regards to your question, Nath, I think the question isn't unified. Inequality is very tough to crack, but if we're going to look at poverty, if we're going to look at hunger, that's a different issue altogether. The reason being, if we think about poverty and hunger, for example, there are around 125 million people around the world that are in need of humanitarian aid because of that. And the total cost of eradicating poverty to some degree, and hunger as well, hovers around $20 billion if we do it effectively. The reason why we can't do it effectively is because there's a lot of money being spent trying to end this issue, but money is flowing to different parties in the meantime. And the effectivity of deploying the cash or deploying the aid is something that today we have an issue with. So if we look at digital technologies, for example, AI and blockchain can definitely help in ensuring that there is transparency and ensuring that we are able to deploy it more effectively, and also in ensuring that we can collect data that will help us take better decisions moving forward. Now, AI is not the solution. Most people think that it is the solution. AI is a tool that helps us arrive at the solution if we use it effectively. And if anything, this technology depends on historical data. It teaches itself by going through data that is historically there. And in that front, I think that the more we deploy it and the more we actually start to audit the deployment to understand if it is responsible, if we understand that it is inclusive, and to understand the long-term impacts, the better it will be for everyone. Now, the second part of your question, which I think also links to inequality in some way, shape, or form, there is a big challenge when it comes to these digital technologies and populations across the world. Trying to represent culture, trying to safeguard children, as Dr. Park mentioned, trying to also ensure that every portion of society is able to leverage these technologies is extremely important. One of the challenges that we've seen in the UAE from the get-go is there's a huge challenge with regards to ignorance within the decision-making process. If you ask a government official to deploy AI, they'll be more than happy to deploy it. But if you ask them what the challenges are, if they ask them what deployment actually means, it will be very difficult for them to actually answer that question in an effective manner. So we in the UAE try to overcome that by taking all of our officials at a specific level, from director level and above, and the federal government, to go through a one-year course to understand AI, to be able to understand what the code actually entails, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how this technology is going to cause certain issues, like, for example, addiction in children, mental health issues in adults, for example, increased depression and loneliness, increase, for example, the use of technology. So there are many different challenges that are going to be coming because of deploying technology. And finally, I'd also like to say that the more we have inclusion of the voice of citizens, the more we have a exposure or exposing citizens to what we are doing as government, the better the deployment is going to be. Because we need to engage these individuals. We need to ensure that everyone has a voice in what we're doing as a government. And we should not deploy AI for the sake of deploying AI or digital technologies altogether.
Thank you very much for that very extensive answer, Minister. So I think that also opened up the minds, helps open up the minds of other governments who are looking at your government in aiming for have leadership in digital technologies and how that can be used, to provide for the needs of population. And as you said, this challenges on hunger, poverty, and inequality are not happening on the same plane, and also would require different approaches. I'd like to ask Patricia from Health Enabled, like if she can share some lessons. This is also connected to the response of His Excellency Minister Al-Ulama. Like, do you have any lessons? Can you share lessons from examples and potentials of digital technology as a tool to provide health and education for all? Like addressing the issues of rights, gender inequality, also social inequalities, and also the needs of the future generation. So I think this also connects to the response of His Excellency Minister Al-Ulama. So would be good to hear from you, Patricia, on those lessons that you could impart at this point in terms of the potentials of digital technology.
Sure. So there are a lot of really great examples throughout the world of technologies that and countries that have really made an effort to put into place the sorts of responsible practices to have technology scale and be supported over time. I would say like a really interesting area that I've been very actively involved in is that there is a significant gender gap in technology, right? So and we see it throughout the throughout systems, whether it's in the leadership or in the implementation, in the data field. We don't have a lot of gender disaggregated data in a lot of places to make informed decisions that are inclusive. And one country that I have found really fascinating very recently is Ethiopia, which took a stand similar to what has been done in Canada, which is to say that like we should have 50-50 parity in all activities, from the lowest to the highest of gender representation. And they've done that in their digital health, and they're very actively really pushing for that and trying to do that. It's not easy because it has to start from your education pipeline and work your way up. And it includes a lot of heavy investment in training and in support and in mentorship, and those sorts of things. But I feel like as countries start to work through this and grapple with it, I think we'll start to see some really interesting innovations in this space that are very different than what we've had necessarily in the past. And I also feel like there's also this inclusivity around, and I think, Omar, you mentioned this earlier, Your Excellency, is having citizen voices involved in the processes, including the voices of children. I was really impressed with the work that UNICEF had done on these responsible AI principles for children, where they engage children from around the world to talk about, their feelings around technology, et cetera. And I think there's this general both desire to embrace technology, but also a fear of it. And I think that's a very healthy balance, for people to have, so that we do become more grounded in like knowing how best to, to approach the use of technology more effectively.
Thanks for sharing that, Patricia. I just like to mention, because you mentioned Ethiopia, there's actually one of the participants whom we don't see here actually shared the experience of Ghana as well, coming from that region in terms of rolling out open source in district health information software, and also raising the issues about flexibility, collaborative design, and also looking into human-centered decision-making approach to the implementation and use of frontier technologies, just to mention that. And I'd like to ask Yuyun, because Andrew, you'll have to wait a bit, because I think this question to Yuyun is connected to what Patricia is elaborating. I'd like to ask Yuyun, the innovative proposals from civil society to address digital divide, also to ensure digital safety for children, also ensuring global standards for digital skills and literacy. How useful have they been, or how effective? So can you tell us about the implementation side? What are the prospects and maybe the challenges that you see in terms of implementing this global standards?
Before we go to that question, I want to go to the Andy's question, as well as the Highness Dr. Omar remark related to the data is oil, which I've been actually thinking about it a lot. I think this data is oil is a very significant remark that shows the current ecosystem of technology that puts the technology first, not children first or human first. I think this is a very important part. If you think about oil, it comes from the land, and its obvious commodity, its obvious properties. But data comes from the individuals. So nobody has a right to just pluck the straw and suck it up. So if you think about this, the data, this is really directly related to basic human right of privacy. And it is very fundamental of the human being as not as deemed as a commodity, human being as individuals that has intrinsic worths that nobody can touch. So like having that principle that in mind, we should not use that statement ever again from my perspective, because that actually misleads the people to think that, okay, data is something that is okay for us to, is worldwide, wild west. Whoever goes in and plug in and suck it up, that's mine. So that has been the ecosystem of technology, unfortunately. And that ecosystem generates the ecosystem that proliferate the fake news, that now the truth, nobody knows what the truth is. There's so much us and them, the bipolar culture of the technology, and winner takes all technology ecosystem is quite worrisome. So I think one of the things I want to raise to the G20, and since we have two esteemed policymakers, it takes a lot of courage for the policymakers to say, hey, we need to slow down and think about it. Because now in the technology world, AI world, think about how much money we are putting into the development of AI. How much we care about open flow of data, but not really talking about what it means to be and how does it impact the individual life. So it is important discussion, and that really need to involve, like example from the Patricia say AI principle, that involvement children's, but it really takes a courage to say, hey, we need to involve the multi-stakeholders and think about what is the impact of what we are talking about when it comes to AI development and research and employments within the society. So it takes a lot of courage and also high cost. And who's going to say this? This is, I think, G20 have to really take care of and take the lead of this discussion. We don't see much of this discussion happening in technologists community, unfortunately. I'm sorry if there's people saying, but I don't see the evidence of much going on. Unfortunately, related to your question, Nat, civic society raise that issue that much? No, we are not doing the job very correctly either, because we don't know about the impact that in full. So it is really our whole, everybody's responsibility. Nobody is free from this. It is about the next generation issue, which is not that far from it. And then COVID made us push into this, the fast digitization and technologies without really much of consensus of an understanding of impact of it. It's really worrisome. I'll stop here. I know Andrews is next. I'm putting the responsibility onto the shoulder of Andy.
Yeah. But that was really provocative, and I think it's also it's good to see that self-reflection, because like the assumption is like we ask that question, no? Like also we pose solutions, but as you said, like maybe not, no, maybe we're not asking the right questions, or not even knowing what to ask. So I think thanks for also picking up that whole provocative discussion on data. It's not oil, maybe it's oil. I'd like to go back to Andy, like and ask him questions that are related to what Yun said in the earlier speakers. So like, how can we make the data revolution more democratic? You know, how do we ensure that advances in automation and AI do not lead to so much destabilization in society, large-scale job losses, displacement, and all? And like, I think this is a challenge not just for the OECD, but also for the rest of the world, of course. But again, because OECD has put in all this groundwork for laying down principles, and the next challenge is operationalizing those principles and implementing. You might have some thoughts on this, like how do you make the data revolution more democratic, like and avoiding so much of the adverse impact of this disruption that has been happening in the past 2 years. Andy?
There's a problem coming later in the lineup here. I'm getting a lot of very interesting, provocative questions. Let me, if I could, just start off by saying how much I agree with Yun about personal data deserving different treatment, and it is really a very private thing that we need to, I think, have a separate policies for. Just to kind of hit the tennis ball back, I would say, but to be technical and a little bit, I think we need to put an evidence base under this discussion, because it will help, I think, help us think about it and get away from simple metaphors and so forth. And so some of the statistics I've seen suggest that almost 2/3 about of data going over the network is streaming video and images. It's Netflix, it's YouTube, it's so forth. And I don't think that's the data we're talking about. Yes, there's a personal data component to it. I agree with you. What you're watching can tell a lot about who you are and so forth, and that should be protected. But there's a different data regime for intellectual property and so forth. Likewise, when I fly a plane over the Atlantic, if I ever do that again, it throws off a lot of engineering data about the performance of the aircraft and how it should be maintained when it hits the its destination. And to me, that's really useful. It means that we're much more efficient in the use of that aircraft, hopefully less polluting, safer, and so forth. And again, that's a different type of data. Now, if you can, I don't mean to go on this too far, but if you can begin to say, hey, what was the special meal that you ordered, or what did you watch on the plane? Okay, that's a different type of data. I'm just trying to open this up a bit. And I think that this is a huge resource which we need to better, I think, understand the different varieties of it. And this is one of the things we're doing at the OECD to try to come to grips with it. Now, about democratizing it, I agree with you that here, and I think this is what Patty, if I may, was getting to, as it is now, it's not about any one individual's data. It's about the pooling of it, the combining of it with different data sets, and the contextualization of the data, the time of day, and these things. And that takes a level of sophistication that I think is not so readily spread around or apparent. There's a few firms that do it very, very well. And it goes to what people were talking about, I won't say winner take all, but winner take most. And we've seen that in some of the work we've done at the OECD, where we've seen productivity, which I think is important for improving the standard of living. Okay, you raise everyone's boat through higher productivity, and that's what we need to achieve in many parts of the world. But what we've seen with productivity at the OECD is it's separating into two different streams. The average is kind of lackluster, and this hides two divergent paths where some firms are doing very well. They're at the frontier and they're just, wow. And other firms are lagging behind. And this gap has been growing over time. And I think this is partly due to the nimbleness of these big firms that get it and then invest in R&D and double down and continue to grow. But it's also, and we're beginning to see that, there's a report out this week by the US Congress, that there is a need to rethink our competitive environment and some of our competition policies to, I think, be up to date with this new world and this new resource. And I think that will help democratize it. And then let me just end, so I don't want to go on too far, but it comes back to Yun's point about ownership and control and stewardship of the data. I try to avoid the word ownership because data, as it goes down the value chain, gets changed and values added by different people. As I said, one individual's data is important to that individual, but for value terms, usually it needs to be combined with others. And so my point here is that it's the control and the stewardship of that control, which I think is where our policies need to improve and pay greater attention. And I give the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a lot of credit for advancing this in the G20. It is not an easy conversation, as they know very well. That says it's an important conversation, and one that I hope continues in that venue and others. So let me stop there. I don't know if I've gotten to democratizing it a bit, but I think one important element of that is that control element. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, because at the core of that discussion on democratization of data, of course, is the issue of control and stewardship, ownership. Like, these things are really minefields in that discussion. And the first question that comes up to mind is: Are we ready? Is the word ready or equipped, to discuss and also operationalize whatever we agree on when it comes to control and stewardship of data? Like, can we use existing intellectual property rights regime to assert control and stewardship over data? Like, this becomes much more messy and complex. Like, if you go to communities, for example, like data that are extracted from farmers' fields, like who owns that data? Like, how can communities assert stewardship over the data? Like, are concepts like access and benefit sharing, IPR, appropriate not to govern that discussion? I think these are key things that are out there that I don't think any of us have the answer, but I think this is a good time to discuss this. So I'd like to throw this question to Dr. Munir. I actually have another question to Dr. Munir in my list, but I think this is a much more interesting question. Of course, that whole discussion of how do you realize the potential of that idea of human-centered AI always comes up in many G20 documents on digital economy. And that's still a key question, and may even have to be brought in when we discuss this whole idea of control and stewardship of data, because like AI is actually powered by data. Like, how do you take control and assert stewardship over data when you feed all that big data into algorithms that actually make AI work and all that? So I'd like to throw that question back to Dr. Munir, coming from the discussions in the G20 and also prospects in the coming years for this discussion. Sir?
Thank you, Nath. And I couldn't say it any better than how I've heard it so far. His Excellency Omar and Dr. Park, Andy, everyone, you commented on all the key elements when it comes to issues in AI and the AI principles. I have a few comments that I would like to add in terms of what happened to the G20, but maybe since we were talking about data, I'll stick to that point. We went back and forth on whether data is the new oil or not. Maybe let's call it the new lifeline of the economic and social interactions, and that way it kind of shifts gears a little bit. So we know data has altered how people interact and how services are utilized, and even food and things are delivered. And data has given rise to new information industries, and it's basically the foundation of the fourth industrial revolution. Different countries still have different legitimate policy objectives for protecting their data and the data of their citizens. And it gets even more complicated, as you mentioned, Andy, when we get to cross-border data flow. And in the G20, it was quite challenging to discuss these topics and how countries and governments can work together to create an environment of trust where regulatory objectives can be met even if data is moved across these different jurisdictions. And towards that, we were working on data free flow with trust to establish a global framework for privacy and data protection that requires not only deep understanding of policy landscapes, but also respect of different legitimate policy objectives. In that sense, the Saudi presidency worked on strengthening the foundation for further G20 discussions, and this is something you all referred to be filling some of the existing information gaps. This was done by mapping the different issues at stake, offering options of areas that could be pursued further by the G20 as a foundation for next year's. In other words, what we looked at was ways to promote data free flow with trust and cross-border data flow. We looked at new issues raised by data and data sharing, identifying and evolving policies that affect data movement, and discussing instruments that have emerged to enable data transfer across these jurisdictions. Under the Saudi presidency, it was agreed with the G20 countries and members to continue working to promote data flow with trust in future presidencies by sharing experiences, exploring better practices, and understanding technologies such as privacy-enhanced technologies or enhancing technologies. And in the kingdom, very recently, we've approved and announced a number of policies, regulations, and guidelines in relation to data and data management to kind of create an entire national framework for privacy and data protection. We announced in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a personal data protection policy. This was just announced maybe less than a month ago. A data classification policy, a data sharing policy, a freedom of information policy, an open data policy, and in addition, we worked on guidelines for data protection for children online. This is also coupled with enhancing cybersecurity controls to continue to address data protection under the existing anti-cyber crime laws, for example. The kingdom also has sector-specific data regulations when it comes to areas that are very data intensive, such as healthcare or telecommunications or finance. And in there, we try to ensure safeguarding patients' information, restricting disclosure of information intercepted by communication transmission, or disclosing subscriber data, for example, to third parties, and ensuring protection of personal data of banks and financial institutions, of course. Maybe, Nath, I'll stop here. I still want to comment on the AI principles, but I think the data discussion that we have is very interesting.
Oh, you may, Dr. Munir, because my next question to Minister Olama is actually about that. Might be good to link what your views on that human-centered AI and pass it on to him.
Sure, thank you, Nath. So last year during the Saudi presidency, or actually the year before, I'll go back to the Japanese presidency, the G20 countries agreed on a set of principles for responsible stewardship of AI and trustworthy AI. These principles were developed while recognizing that AI may present societal challenges, including transitions in the labor market, privacy, security, ethical issues, new digital divides, and the need for AI capacity building, as mentioned by all the esteemed panelists. Just to bring these AI principles again to mind that were adopted by the G20 Japanese presidency, we're looking at ensuring the following areas are being respected, which are basically inclusive growth, sustainability and development, sustainable development and well-being, human-centered values and fairness, transparency and explainability, robustness, security and safety, and finally accountability. And this year, during the Saudi presidency, we worked towards implementing those principles by collecting policy actions and national efforts by members and member countries to create an enabling environment for human-centered AI, which was adopted under an annex to the DETF Ministerial Declaration called the G20 Examples of National Policies to Advance the G20 AI Principles. These examples match the 5 mentioned G20 AI principles with examples of policy actions undertaken by G20 members, showing how the principles are actively offering guidance to policymakers, which is a point that Dr. Park, you were referring to. maximizing the benefits of AI while minimizing risks and underpinning mutual learnings and knowledge sharing.
Thanks for that, Dr. Munir. I'd like to pursue that discussion on human-centered AI with His Excellency Minister Alolama. As a Minister of AI in the UAE, how do you see this happening? How do you really drive research and development towards socially responsible, inclusive, human-centered AI? And I think we're all tussling with that idea. How do you implement human-centered AI? Who defines, and also how do you operationalize that? I think it would be good to share some thoughts on this.
Thank you, Nath. And I also thank you for asking His Excellency Dr. Munir about his views. I'm going to segue into my view, but before that, I think we've had a lot of provoking statements made by my esteemed panelists. So I'd like to throw a few provocative statements from my own as well. I actually do not agree or completely agree with some of the statements with regards to data, because I do generally believe that every action and every inaction we take generates data. And if we are going to govern every single use of every single bit of data, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to think pragmatically about what we can do and how we can go forward with it. And I'll give you an example of that. I do completely agree with Dr. Park's views on data. I think the use of data is what needs to be governed and how it's used. And the type of data is what we really need to try to police and think of if we're going to look at this pragmatically. Because one of the challenges that we've seen, and this goes to answering the question that you asked me, is that the private sector is thriving because it is a wild, wild west scenario today. And in many cases, that thriving private sector is creating for us solutions that are improving lives and that are really creating a lot of good. But there are a few uses that are extremely negative. And I think that because it is a wild, wild west right now, we are able to find these and actually govern them and talk about them. So we need to create a sort of boundary that does not eliminate or eradicate innovation, but also does not make it into a situation where people are harmed in the long run or even the short run. And that is what we are thinking of in the UAE. Now, our motto for our AI strategy in the UAE and our national program for artificial intelligence is BRAIN, building a responsible artificial intelligence nation, because we do believe that every deployment of AI needs to be thought of responsibly. We also do believe that being responsible about AI and being responsible about data is not just being responsible today, but being responsible for all future generations as well. What we've done from the get-go is actually try to understand what works and what doesn't work, and also try to understand what we need to be doing as a country. So the reason why I made that provocative statement in the beginning of this answer is because what we've realized that if we try to boil the ocean from day one, we don't have the resources, the time, or are able to continue the effort long enough to be able to do anything. So we worked with the OECD, with the United Nations, and with other global institutions to create something called the Global Artificial Intelligence Governance Forum. We launched this in 2017, where we brought in all of the different parties to tell us how we as a government can govern better this technology and what should be done. So the outcome of this conversation was actually quite interesting. The outcome was that no one agrees on how best to govern this technology. Every single institution and every single country has a different way of looking at it. And we ended the meeting where we started. We ended the meeting without knowing what exactly are the steps that we need to take moving forward. So what we decided to do as a country was, okay, let's take the whole conversation, dissect it, and see what is doable from what is being said and what is ambitious and can be done if enough countries come on board. The other challenge that we've seen, and I've also talked to Minister Munir about this a few times before, is a matter of scale. Sometimes as a country, we want to do a lot, but because we don't have the scale or because we do not have the stick and the carrot that will allow the private sector companies to follow our lead in certain things, we go back to the initial point of not being able to enforce any sort of change. the EU was able to enforce change through GDPR because they had the scale and because they had enough countries, come on board with regards to that. So we changed our rhetoric from thinking inwards and thinking of the UAE on its own to actually thinking outwards, thinking of ourselves as a global player. One of the things we did there was we launched something called the AI bridges between the UAE and other countries, where we've signed agreements to actually work with these countries to tell them what our concerns are and what are the opportunities that we see, and actually share best practices when it comes to AI and ensure that the benefit actually cuts across borders. Because what we've seen historically is also the negative impacts cut across borders. So it's a double-edged sword on that front. And then when it comes to moving towards responsible and inclusive AI, the only way to do this is to make sure that everyone has a seat on the table. So one of the important initiatives that we also do is something called Think AI, that brings the academic sector, governments, non-government organizations as well, and the private sector together with an involvement of citizens to have an open discussion where we hear every person or every side's answer to the issue to understand as well how we can maneuver around this effectively. Because, we are moving towards uncharted territory. One of the things that we worry about as well, in addition, is the fact that if we don't create a conducive environment for AI and for these technology companies, they will be created abroad and we will be using these platforms. So today, if I ask anyone in South Korea, Singapore, the UAE, or even the US about using, for example, Google, it will be very difficult for them to search on another platform because they're so accustomed to using it. Banning Google would not do any good. And I think trying to govern Google isn't going to be something that we can do effectively unless the whole world agrees on it. So we want to be pragmatic. I think being pragmatic about this and being realistic about what can be done in the short, medium, and long term is extremely important if governments are going to do something about it. But I'd like to conclude by saying that the issues mentioned by Dr. Park and by Andy with regards to actually asking the right questions, with what has to do with data. It's very funny and ironic that the only two industries that call the individuals that use their services users are the drug industry and the tech industry. No other industry calls individuals users. And it shows you how addictive these sectors can be and both the positive and the negative side of it. It's important for us to ensure that we are not users on the negative side of it, that we don't get addicted to these technologies or use them negatively, but that we actually use these technologies to improve lives and to create a better future.
Thank you, Minister. I'm actually looking at the questions that were posed by the participants. There were actually more sharing than question, and some of the questions about connectivity were actually addressed earlier, like particularly in the response of His Excellency Dr. Munir. But there are also questions that I would really like to highlight as we enter the last 10 minutes of the session. I would rather that we use these last 10 minutes for your closing remarks that are actually centered around a common question that each of you can answer. Also bringing in some of the questions that are raised by our audiences, like coming from our experience, our collective experience in the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues. Like, what would be the key lessons that we can bring forward, like in shaping the future of development, taking from our experiences in using digital technologies to address public health concerns, the pandemic, also addressing the challenges in the food supply system during the pandemic, and also many of the things that persist and are highlighted as many of us, particularly in the urban areas and those who have access, experience in terms of cybersecurity, also exposure of children to the digital world. Like, what can you say? What can you leave as a key message in terms of like what do all these experiences and lessons so far in our collective experience in the pandemic that we could bring towards our the shaping the future of development coming from the digital perspective. So it's a very loaded question, and I'd like to ask to give each of you 2 minutes to respond to that question, which is a closing question. So I'd like to start with Patricia, and go to Yuyun, Andrew, and then we go the next to Dr. Munir and Minister Alulama. Patricia, coming from your experience from the health front.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. I think that this discussion has been really incredible. And I would just say that urgency should not take precedence over responsibility, that we now have very clear guidance, guidelines, principles, frameworks for how to approach this that can have both short-term and long-term benefits. I also feel that inclusivity is everything from in the data, in the research, in the the building the evidence base as Andy was talking about earlier, as well as in policymaking. I think we need to have more inclusive policymaking processes, as well as algorithms development. We're starting to see some interesting movements to increase diversity and transparency in algorithms development, et cetera, for artificial intelligence. And I also think that there's a level of accountability that we have to have with the private sector to make them more responsible. I was on a call with a very large private sector company the other day that was planning to do some work in sub-Saharan Africa and had never heard of the principles for digital development. And I felt like that was my win for the day, was to introduce them to those principles. But I do feel like we do have to start to engage more effectively with the private sector and hold them more accountable.
Thank you. Yuyun?
Thank you very much. It was very insightful comments from everyone. Especially, I really appreciate the comment from the Minister Omar on everyone has to have a seat in the table. I think in the AI age, one of the important things is a empowered and informed citizen, and which I think is everybody's agenda. So I really appreciate, and one of the things I want to highlight from the C20 members, it is my first time to be part of this G20 engagement group from the civic sector side. And I like to really compliment, and also I experienced a wonderful experience having this principle of everybody in the table. So we had a very active discussion with the G20 and systematic understanding of how civic sector voice can be part of this decision-making process. So I'd like to actually see this momentum to go from the next presidency from G20 so that it can be really truly multi-stakeholder discussion going forward. Thank you very much. And I'd love to actually connect everyone after this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy?
Thank you, Neth. And again, I'm very appreciative of all the fellow panelists. As horrific as the pandemic is, and I go back to the beginning statements by the Minister and His Excellency Omar, it has taught us some lessons about humanity, human behavior, and how to maybe re-inject resilience into our societies and our economies. And apropos of this session, I think digital solutions can play a huge role there. I mean, they've kept us working. Look at this. They've kept us learning, maybe imperfectly, but we're advancing on it. And they've kept some semblance of social interaction, which I think is important. Why? Keeping us safe. But it's also exposed something we've known for years, and this is where we started, is the digital divide is not just a boutique side issue anymore. It is a fundamental core policy goal, like adequate housing is. I think it's achieved that level. And so that awareness or raising that the pandemic has brought, I think is very good. And the same, and I'll keep it right at this, with data. I think people have begun to appreciate that data is important. North America, I think they've woken up that there's some real privacy issues here. In Europeans, just the two continents I know best, have begun to realize that while privacy is important, there are other social goals as well, such as stopping a pandemic. And so I don't want to use the word trade-off, but we have to look at how to keep that data safe, but then achieve other policy goals, which I think is a really important step forward. So with that, let me thank you for the panel and turn it back to you now.
Thank you very much. Very short remark, final remark from Dr. Munir.
Thank you, Nath, and I'd like to start again by thanking everyone in the panel. It was a great discussion. I'm honored to be amongst these great minds. And as mentioned by the previous speakers, Andy and Patricia, the current global crisis has shown us really the importance of the digital technologies and how they really allowed us to resume economic activities, especially with the social distancing that took place. And during the few months of the peak of the pandemic, the Saudi presidency under the G20 called for an extraordinary ministerial meeting where they brought together the countries to share the best digital economy policies and practices and lessons learned in real time as they were happening, as all countries were in crisis mode, trying to leverage technology to deal with the pandemic. And we've seen great policies being shared from all the countries and supported somewhat in that knowledge sharing process. And we think it was a great opportunity for everyone to come together in a collaborative way and to use technology really for what it's meant to do for the betterment of mankind. We've seen how having proper technologies enables people today in the 21st century to have the right kind of structural inequalities resolved. And you can't really do that. You can't have a more inclusive, sustainable world if not everyone is connected. So ensuring connectivity and opportunity for everyone to access these great technologies, again, is only becoming more and more important. We've seen it in the crisis. The people that weren't connected could not communicate with us the way we're communicating now and could not leverage the benefits of technology, whether through educational platforms or online delivery platforms, or even contributing to that gig economy in any way. So again, connectivity, ensuring that we're empowering people through giving them all the right kind of equal opportunities to internet was one of the top things that we've seen through this crisis. And we continue seeing that this needs to be a top priority moving forward. I'd like to thank all the panelists again for the great discussion that we had. It was an honor being with you today. And like Dr. Park mentioned, I would love to stay in touch with each and every one of you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Mr. Alalama, final statement.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to give you a metaphor. I think that most of the times when we look at technology, we are like sprinters gearing up to sprint. But what we need to understand is we're actually running a marathon. And these deployments, the plans that we put together, the policies, are things that have to actually sustain for the long run and ensure that the ambitions that we have continually improve the lives of citizens who are the people that we want to serve. I also hope that through this discussion and beyond this discussion, citizens are going to be more vocal with regards to how we can serve them better as governments, because this is why governments exist. And governments need to be able to listen more and more so to the needs of citizens. I'd like to conclude my remarks by actually giving you my vision for what's going to happen post the pandemic. There are going to be a lot of promises and some perils as well that we need to collectively work together. The promises are that there is a positive side to the pandemic and to what we went through, as Andrew mentioned, as well as the other panelists, which is we are going to have more prudent policymakers and individuals as well that want to create a better future moving forward, that have seen the worst and want to make sure that we don't go through this again. We will see as well a tsunami of people who want to find purpose, because historically, we've always had an issue with regards to finding our purpose and trying to go through the rat race. And it is going to propel the digital transformation. Now, the pessimistic side is, unfortunately, we will see a lot of prejudice, we will see protectionism, and we will see people protest inaction or lack of action. So I think that we need to ensure that each one of us carries the flag or the banner of trying to create a better future, to combat the negative sides of this pandemic, while at the same time ensuring that the positive side not only moves forward, but thrives. Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure being with all of you today.
Oh, thank you very much for all those wonderful closing statements. And I will be doing you a lot of injustice if I try to summarize. Just let me just use this final minute to thank all our esteemed panelists for sharing your wisdom, your time, and all your generosity of sharing all those thoughts and provocations in this panel, and to all our participants for listening, and those who have contributed their views in the on the chat. Not too many questions, but there's a lot of input, enriching further the discussion. I think the fact that we have gone over time for almost 5 minutes is really a proof that there's so much to discuss. There's so much engagement that's needed, so much deliberation that's needed for society to be able to shape the future of development with the digital perspective, the digital lens coming in. And I, as a member of civil society, would really go for having more of this deliberation before we even jump into this future that is shaped by digital technology. So thank you for all those wisdom, and thank you so much for coming from the minister saying that each one needs to have a seat on the table in deciding and shaping the future of development in the digital perspective. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night, good day, and thank you to the Secretariat for all the support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.